Welcome to Ian Cinema, your destination for endless entertainment and unforgettable movie moments. Discover exciting films, inspiring stories, and cinematic journeys across every genre. Whether you love action, drama, thrillers, or timeless favorites, there's always something waiting for you here. Sit back, enjoy the experience, and let Ian Cinema bring the magic of movies to your screen. In this video, we'll take an in-depth look at the 2004 epic action film Troy. We'll explore the movie's story, provide a complete plot summary, and introduce the main cast and their characters. We'll also cover behind-the-scenes production details, discuss the film's box office performance, and share our personal thoughts and reactions. So, let's get started. Troy, 2004, was directed by Wolfgang Petersen and produced by Wolfgang Petersen, Diana Rathbun, and Colin Wilson. The screenplay was written by David Bana, based on Homer's epic poem The Iliad. The film features a musical score by James Horner and was produced by Helena Productions and Plan B Entertainment, with Warner Bros. Pictures serving as the distributor. Released in 2004, Troy is an epic historical action film inspired largely by Homer's legendary tale of the Trojan War. The story opens with two powerful armies preparing for battle. On one side is King Agamemnon of Mycenae, and on the other is King Priapus of Thessaly. Instead of launching a full-scale war, the two rulers agree to settle the conflict with a one-on-one duel between their greatest warriors. King Priapus selects his strongest champion, while Agamemnon chooses the young but legendary warrior, Achilles. Despite his opponent's intimidating size, Achilles defeats him with remarkable speed and skill, proving why he is considered the greatest fighter in Greece. The story then shifts to Sparta, where Prince Hector and Prince Paris, the sons of King Priam of Troy, are celebrating a peace treaty with King Menelaus of Sparta. However, beneath the celebration lies a dangerous secret. Paris has fallen in love with Helen, the wife of Menelaus, and the two are secretly having an affair. When Hector and Paris sail back to Troy, Paris reveals that he has secretly brought Helen with him aboard the ship. When Menelaus discovers that his wife has been taken to Troy, he is furious. He turns to his powerful brother, King Agamemnon, for help. Agamemnon eagerly agrees to wage war against Troy, and not only to help his brother recover Helen but also because he has long desired to conquer the wealthy city. Following the advice of King Nestor, Agamemnon decides that the Greeks cannot hope to defeat Troy without the legendary warrior Achilles. Rather than marching into battle immediately, he first sets out to persuade Achilles to join the campaign. Achilles is asked to join the Greek campaign against Troy. King Odysseus of Ithaca and his close friend persuade him on behalf of Agamemnon. At first, Achilles refuses because of his deep hatred for Agamemnon. However, after speaking with his mother, Thetis, he learns that although he is destined to die in the war, his name will be remembered forever. Accepting his fate, Achilles joins the Greek army along with his younger cousin, Patroclus. Meanwhile, Paris and Hector return to Troy and introduce Helen to King Priam. Although Priam is troubled by their decision to bring her to Troy, he welcomes Helen as a guest instead of sending her back. He fears that Paris truly loves her and would be killed by Menelaus if she were returned. Soon, the Greek fleet lands on the shores of Troy and marches toward the Temple of Apollo. Hector orders the Trojans to retreat. During the assault, Achilles captures Pris, a priestess of Apollo and cousin of Hector and Paris, claiming her as his war prize. However, Agamemnon takes Pris away from Achilles, humiliating him. Furious, Achilles refuses to continue fighting, believing that Agamemnon's pride is costing countless lives on both sides. To prevent a full-scale war, Paris and Menelaus agree to settle the conflict through single combat. Agamemnon opposes the idea because his true goal is not Helen but the conquest of Troy. Nevertheless, the duel begins. Menelaus gains the upper hand and nearly kills Paris. Desperate, Paris grabs Hector's leg and begs for help. Unable to watch his brother die, Hector intervenes and kills Menelaus, breaking the agreement. The battle immediately erupts between the Greeks and the Trojans, but the Greek forces are eventually forced to retreat. To lift the soldiers' spirits, Agamemnon offers breeze to his men. Before she is assaulted, Achilles rescues her and takes her back to his tent. As they spend time together, the two gradually fall in love. Convinced that the war is no longer worth fighting, Achilles decides to leave Troy with his men the following morning. Against Hector's advice but encouraged by his advisors, King Priam orders a surprise nighttime attack on the Greek camp. The assault reignites the conflict, and fierce fighting follows. A warrior wearing Achilles' armor leads the Greek forces and eventually faces Hector in single combat. Hector defeats the armored warrior, believing he has killed Achilles. Moments later, everyone realizes the fallen man is actually Patroclus. Shocked by the tragic loss, both armies agree to a temporary truce for the remainder of the day. When Achilles learns that Hector killed Patroclus, he is overcome with grief and rage. He vows to avenge his cousin, knowing he will not rest until Hector is dead. Aware of what is coming, Hector prepares his wife, Andromache, for the worst. He shows her a secret tunnel and tells her to escape with their child if he does not return. Achilles and Hector finally meet in an epic one-on-one duel. Achilles emerges victorious and drags Hector's body round the walls of Troy to dishonor the fallen prince. That night, King Priam bravely enters the Greek camp and personally begs Achilles to return his son's body. Moved by the grieving father's courage and sorrow, Achilles agrees. He returns Hector's body and allows Breeze to accompany Priam back to Troy. The two leaders agree to a 12-day truce so the dead can be properly honored. Knowing he is unlikely to survive the war, Achilles tells his loyal followers to leave Troy and return home. When Agamemnon learns of these events, he remains determined to capture Troy. Odysseus, concerned for the safety of the Greek army, devises a brilliant strategy. The Greeks construct a massive wooden horse, pretending to abandon the war. Their ships hide nearby while selected soldiers conceal themselves inside the horse. When King Priam sees the enormous wooden horse, he believes it is a gift left behind by the Greeks and orders it to be brought inside the city of Troy. Despite Paris's objections, the Greeks release the soldiers hidden inside the wooden horse during the night, and they begin attacking the city. As Troy falls into chaos, Helen and Andromache help civilians escape through a hidden passage. Fearing for the future of his people, Paris gives the sword of Troy to a young survivor and tells him to lead the Trojans to a new homeland before returning to defend the city. Agamemnon kills Priam but is soon slain by Breeze. Achilles desperately searches for Breeze, and just as he finds her, Paris shoots him with several arrows, including the famous arrow that strikes his heel. Mortally wounded, Achilles uses his final moments to ask Breeze to leave Troy and survive. Paris then escapes with Helen, Andromache, Aeneas, and the remaining Trojan survivors, who set out in search of a new home. Meanwhile, the Greeks hold a funeral for their fallen warriors, and Achilles' body is respectfully returned by Odysseus. Troy is based on the Iliad, the legendary Greek epic written by the blind poet Homer around the 8th century BCE. The poem tells part of the story of the Trojan War, the legendary 10-year conflict between the Greeks and the Trojans. Differences between the film and the Iliad. One of the biggest differences is where the story begins. The Iliad starts near the end of the Trojan War, meaning it begins in medias res in the middle of the story. In contrast, the film begins long before that, showing Paris and Helen's meeting and their journey back to Troy. This change was made because modern audiences are generally less familiar with the complete story of the Trojan War, so the film provides the background needed to understand the conflict. The ending is also significantly different. The movie concludes with Achilles' death, the fall of Troy, and the escape of the surviving Trojans. In the Iliad, however, the story ends with Hector's funeral. It never depicts the Trojan horse, the destruction of Troy, or Achilles' death. The filmmakers expanded the ending to give audiences a complete and satisfying conclusion rather than leaving major events unresolved. Agamemnon and Achilles. The rivalry between Agamemnon and Achilles is portrayed differently in the film than in Homer's poem. In the movie, Achilles mainly resents Agamemnon because he dislikes taking orders from him and believes he is an arrogant and power-hungry king. Their conflict becomes even more personal when Agamemnon takes Briz away from Achilles. In the Iliad, however, the dispute is centered on honor rather than love. Briz is awarded to Achilles as a prize for his bravery in battle, symbolizing his glory and reputation, when Agamemnon takes her after being forced to surrender his own prize. Achilles sees it as a direct insult to his honor. This humiliation is what drives his anger and leads him to withdraw from the war. Achilles, Briz, and Patroclus. The film portrays Achilles and Briz as deeply in love. Achilles protects her from harm, risks his life to find her during Troy's fall, and ultimately asks her to escape and live. Their relationship is one of the movie's central emotional storylines. In the Iliad, however, Achilles is never shown to have a strong romantic attachment to Briz. She is important to him, but mainly because she represents his honor rather than the focus of his affection. The person Achilles truly cares about is Patroclus. In the film, Patroclus is portrayed as Achilles' young cousin. In the original poem, however, Patroclus is his closest companion and lifelong friend. Many ancient and modern historians have debated whether their relationship was purely a deep friendship or a romantic one, as such relationships were not uncommon in ancient Greece. Patroclus is also portrayed as older than Achilles in several ancient sources. Director Wolfgang Petersen likely chose to make Patroclus Achilles' cousin and remove any possible romantic interpretation to keep the story focused on the main conflict and to avoid unnecessary controversy. Helen in Paris. One of the most debated questions in Greek mythology is whether Helen truly loved Paris or whether she was taken against her will. In the film, Helen and Paris are portrayed as genuine lovers. Helen willingly leaves Sparta with Paris, escaping an unhappy marriage to Menelaus, who is depicted as unfaithful and emotionally abusive. In the Iliad, Helen's feelings are far more complicated. It is never entirely clear whether she went willingly or was carried away by fate. Different myths offer different interpretations. In some versions of the legend, when Paris is dying, Helen begs one of his wives, the Nymphaeon, to save him, suggesting that she genuinely loved him. Another important detail often overlooked is why Paris ended up with Helen in the first place. According to Greek mythology, the goddess Aphrodite promised Paris the most beautiful woman in the world if he declared her the fairest goddess. That woman was Helen, making her part of the divine bargain long before the Trojan War began. Menelaus' death. One major change made by the film is Menelaus' fate. In the movie, Menelaus is killed by Hector while fighting Paris. In Greek mythology and the Iliad, however, Menelaus survives the Trojan War and eventually returns home with Helen after the fall of Troy. However, in the original poem, Menelaus does not die. He survives the war and initially intends to kill Helen for the destruction and countless deaths caused by her actions. When he finally sees her again, however, he is overcome by her beauty and changes his mind, taking her back as his wife. Even so, Homer's Odyssey suggests that their marriage is far from perfect, hinting at lingering resentment between them. Agamemnon also survives the Trojan War in the original myths. Unlike the film, he is not killed during the conflict. Instead, he returns home, where he is murdered by his wife, Clytemnestra, and her lover, Achilles. Achilles, while not dying in the Iliad itself, is killed later in Greek mythology, just as he is in the film. However, his death is portrayed differently. Rather than being struck by multiple arrows, Achilles is killed by a single arrow to his heel, his only vulnerable spot, as he was believed to be invincible everywhere else. The filmmakers intentionally removed the supernatural aspect of Achilles and vulnerability because they wanted Troy to feel like a realistic or epic rather than a fantasy. This idea is even reflected in the film when Achilles remarks that if he were immortal, he would not need armor. Paris also survives the events of the Iliad, but according to later myths, he eventually dies. He is killed by Philoctetes, the legendary archer who inherited the bow and arrows of Heracles. Unlike the movie, Paris does not escape the fall of Troy alongside Aeneas. One of the biggest differences between the film and Greek mythology is the role of the gods. In the Iliad and other Trojan War myths, the gods constantly interfere in human affairs. In fact, the war begins because Paris chooses Aphrodite as the fairest goddess after she promises him Helen's love. During the duel between Menelaus and Paris, it is not Hector who rescues Paris. Instead, Aphrodite saves him by transporting him safely back to his chamber. Likewise, the gods play a crucial role in Patroclus' death by helping Hector gain the advantage in battle. Achilles' death is also influenced by divine intervention. In some versions of the myth, Apollo himself shoots the fatal arrow disguised as Paris. In others, Paris fires the arrow, but Apollo guides it to strike Achilles in the heel. Either way, Paris does not accomplish the feat entirely on his own. The filmmakers deliberately choose to exclude the gods from appearing on screen, since they wanted Troy to be a grounded historical war drama rather than a mythological fantasy. The gods are only mentioned through dialogue instead of actively participating in the story. The film's impressive scale was also made possible through advanced filmmaking techniques and visual effects. By using prism lenses, the cinematography created the illusion of much larger crowds. Combined with 12-bit optical compositing, visual effects artists could convincingly multiply the number of soldiers on screen. A crowd of just 1,000 extras could appear to be several thousand by combining multiple layers of footage. For the beach sequence in which Achilles and his myrmidons charge ashore, the filmmakers suspended a camera from a cable system. As the soldiers ran across the beach, the camera moved smoothly ahead of them, creating an energetic and immersive tracking shot. The massive battle scenes and the digital recreation of ancient cities were handled by leading visual effects studios. Framestore CFC in London was responsible for recreating the enormous Greek fleet and the landing at Troy, producing around 130 visual effects shots under the supervision of John Thumb. One of the most challenging shots was the wide pullback showing the Greek armada at sea. Only 2 real ships were used during filming. Everything else, including the remaining vessels, the ocean, and much of the environment, was created digitally using matte paintings and computer-generated imagery. The artists built detailed digital ship models by combining elements from several different hull designs, rows of oars, and nearly 100 sail variations. This allowed every ship to appear unique. By the end of the sequence, nearly 800 ships are visible on screen, while the full fleet is estimated to consist of around 1,000 vessels. Throughout Troy, several major themes drive the story, including honor, love, revenge, ambition, and the pursuit of power. While these themes add depth to the narrative, they can also make it difficult for audiences to decide which characters deserve their sympathy, as nearly every major figure is driven by both noble intentions and personal flaws. The theme of honor is especially evident in Paris' decision to fight Menelaus himself. He hopes to prove his courage and earn respect, but when the duel turns against him, he depends on Hector to save his life. Although his willingness to face Menelaus initially seems admirable, his inability to finish the fight ultimately makes him appear cowardly, contributing to his reputation as one of the film's least likable characters. Love is the catalyst that sets the entire story in motion. Paris and Helen's romance sparks the conflict that ultimately leads to the destruction of Troy. Despite the devastating consequences of their relationship, the film portrays them as 2 lovers who remain together because of their deep feelings for one another. But in some ways, this can also be interpreted as an act of weakness and selfishness. Paris and Helen's love puts the entire city of Troy in danger, as countless lives are sacrificed because of their personal choices. The theme of love is also reflected in Achilles' reaction to the death of his cousin, Patroclus, at Hector's hands. This moment is significant because it is the first time we see Achilles openly express deep emotional pain. Until then, he appears fearless and emotionally distant, but Patroclus' death reveals his vulnerability and reminds us that even the greatest warrior can be devastated by the loss of someone he loves. Revenge is another central theme explored throughout Troy, and it appears in several important ways. One example is Menelaus, who seeks revenge against Paris for taking Helen away from him. Another is Achilles, who kills Hector to avenge the death of Patroclus. That act of vengeance ultimately leads to Achilles' own downfall, as Paris later kills him to avenge his brother Hector. Power is equally important to the story. At its core, Troy is about the pursuit of power and the lengths people are willing to go to preserve or expand it. Agamemnon is determined to conquer Troy and seize control of the city. When the opportunity presents itself, he launches a full-scale war against the Trojans. Confident because he has the greatest warrior in Greece, Achilles, fighting on his side, Agamemnon fears very little. However, he also understands just how powerful and influential Achilles is, making him the one man he cannot completely control. Released in 2004, Troy is inspired by Homer's epic poem the Iliad, although it takes significant creative liberties with the original story. One of the biggest changes is the complete removal of the Greek gods, shifting the focus toward human conflict and political ambition rather than divine intervention. The film transforms legendary heroes into more grounded, action-oriented characters while emphasizing realistic battles instead of relying heavily on large-scale computer-generated armies. Rather than overwhelming viewers with massive CGI-filled battle scenes, the film often benefits from focusing on smaller groups of skilled warriors, making the action feel more personal and impactful. The story follows the legendary Trojan War as the fortified city of Troy is invaded by a Greek alliance led by Menelaus of Sparta and Agamemnon, the powerful king of Mycenae. The conflict begins when the young Trojan prince Paris, during what is meant to be a peaceful diplomatic visit to Sparta, falls in love with and takes Queen Helen back to Troy with him. Paris is portrayed by Orlando Bloom, while Helen is played by Diane Kruger. Their actions infuriate Menelaus, Helen's husband, and also concern Paris' older brother Hector, played by Eric Bana. Hector rightly points out that taking another king's wife while visiting on a peace mission is the worst possible way to maintain peace. One question the film never fully answers is why Helen chooses to leave everything behind for Paris after knowing him for such a short time. Instead of portraying her as someone driven purely by irresistible passion, the movie presents her as a woman longing for a peaceful life. She tells Paris, "I don't want a hero, I want a man I can grow old with." While this modern perspective makes her character more relatable, it differs considerably from the spirit of traditional Greek mythology, where characters are often driven by fate, honor, and the influence of the gods. Helen's relationship with Paris becomes the spark that ignites the larger conflict, setting the Greek armies on a path toward the seemingly unconquerable city of Troy. At the center of the Greek forces stands Achilles, widely regarded as the greatest warrior of his time, played by Brad Pitt. However, the film presents him as a more reflective and conflicted hero than the legendary figure found in Greek mythology. In the ancient stories, heroes rarely question themselves or struggle with inner doubt. They are driven by honor, destiny, and glory. In Troy, Achilles is portrayed with greater emotional depth, making him feel more human, even if that interpretation differs from Homer's original vision. Achilles is all of these things. He operates on the flanks of the Greek army with his own independent band of warriors, often pursuing his own agenda rather than following the commands of the Greek leadership. In many ways, he acts as an outsider, carrying out his own strategy and diplomacy. He has little respect for Agamemnon, believing him to be an ineffective leader with poor judgment, and he remains emotionally detached from the war until his beloved cousin, Patroclus, is killed in battle. Patroclus, who bears a slight resemblance to Achilles, puts on Achilles' helmet and armor to deceive the Trojans. Until his helmet is removed, everyone believes Achilles himself has fallen in combat. The moment is presented as a major turning point. The film even pauses the massive battle where thousands of soldiers are locked in fierce hand-to-hand combat to focus entirely on Patroclus' death. With everyone else seemingly standing still, almost like spectators watching a fight on a playground. Brad Pitt is a talented actor with undeniable screen presence, and he spent 6 months training intensely to achieve the physical appearance required for the role. However, Achilles never feels like a character he fully inhabits. His performance is thoughtful and restrained, but it doesn't quite capture the larger-than-life presence that defines the legendary Greek hero. One of the classic strengths of sword and sandal epics is their grand, heroic visual style, where larger-than-life characters dominate the screen. Brad Pitt, however, approaches Achilles as a modern, psychologically realistic character. He brings emotional complexity and subtlety to a role that, by its mythological nature, isn't meant to be ordinary or deeply realistic. Director Wolfgang Petersen makes a similar choice throughout the film, attempting to present Greek mythology as if it were grounded historical drama. But the extraordinary events of Greek myth aren't meant to fit within the limits of everyday human behavior, or that larger-than-life quality is exactly what makes mythology so powerful. Classic films such as Electra, which explores the murder of Agamemnon after the Trojan War, embrace this idea. They use a bold, stylized dramatic approach that understands myth should feel symbolic rather than realistic. That style may not appeal to every modern multiplex audience, but perhaps it was never intended to. The film's finest scene belongs to Peter O'Toole, who creates a deeply emotional and intimate moment amid all the spectacle and action. He plays King Priam of Troy, who secretly leaves the safety of his city under the cover of night and enters the Greek camp to meet Achilles face to face. Earlier, Achilles had defeated Priam's son Hector in single combat outside the walls of Troy and dragged his body back to the Greek camp behind his chariot. Now, the grieving king humbly asks Achilles to return Hector's body so it can receive the proper funeral rites. The film gives this scene the time and quiet attention it deserves, allowing the emotion, dignity, and humanity of the encounter to unfold naturally. It stands as the movie's most memorable and powerful moment, and we believe it when Aeneas tells Priam, "You're a far better king than the one who leads this army." A talent presence is a reminder of Lawrence of Arabia 1962, which I saw again 2 weeks ago, and which proved that a patient with dialogue and character is more important than action in making war movies work. As for the Greek cities themselves, a glitch from the old Hollywood epics has remained intact. This is the convention that whenever a battle-great drama take place, all the important characters have box seats for it. When a battle Hector before the walls of that tribe, for example, Priam and his family have a shot of weaving stand at the front of the place, and we get the usually crowd reaction shots and some of the awkward close-up of actresses to look graveyard in a way try resemble the Lemel both area about fortress under siege both are defeated because of faulty night watchman. The Mexicans sneak up on the Alamo undetected, and absolutely nobody is a week to see the Greece climbing out of the Trojan horse. One difference between the two movies is that Billy Bob Thornton and the other Alamo actors are given music, avocations, dialogue, and deliver it well, while Troy provides a dialogue that probably cannot be delivered well because it would sound even so that way. Picture the scene: you are the possessive Warner boss in Los Angeles pitching a movie about the Sage of Troy to various sharp-suited executives. Perhaps a Jennifer Aniston and Brad Pitt area present, also representing their company Plan B Films. It's a rip-roaring a sand and sandal tight and theatrical epica providing nods all around. I see Brad also very much the hero, as at least the glorious warrior who defeats everyone in a battle. But it's not just about war. It's about love. Moore notes the passionate love that goes to the center of the ancient Greek word, the love that sparked his greatest contrast. Music had the love of Achilles, and I have got a great casting idea. Music. Orlando Bloom is Patroclus. He is Achilles' companion, his comrade, his brother in arm, and also, let's face it, his act. At this moment, at a discreet signal from Mr. Pitt, a Scotch Godard has entered to grasp by the throat. Cut to Warner Brothers exterior. You are flung out to the street. A short off and stay out. The $200 billion mega summer movie draw in fact smooth way the more heterodox aspect of the pre-Christian world Willie attempting a Western narrative conveys than in Hammer's Iliad where the Crimea shows merely some of the final days of the C. David Benioff screenplay directed by Wolfgang Petersen's it compresses the entire 10 years saga into a 2 hours and 40 minutes and for the big the final absorbs the famous Trojan horse from Homer's Craig War Pitt is the exquisitely introductive a barrier who resents answering to the conceits greeted King Eggman played a prime part of the rift of breed character actors who according to ancient Hollywood law play Venal smaller parts Peter O'Toole is the Trojan King a prime and Julie Christie is still delicate beautiful as a mother Tatica Tria as an I thought. Music. That the Dria After Tomorrow was the perfect ditto essa what I says on the thin summer Hollywood the movie move over a climatologist Greek legends are back underground and fetching mini skits the Ariel, here Eggman a Hector in Paris, a whole host of stars from a time 4,000 years ago and being a celebrity made you were actually a celebrated for something, yes. That a Samsung seems to be mostly an ability to stick bits of metal into the other people with gusto and fury. But even this has slightly more catchy than being on the front page of magazine. We all know a farmer know the other only the epic storyteller brands by the Mediterranean climate not Harold Bust Yellow Jello biker and animators the coins had a crack at the Odyssey and now it's Wolfgang Pett and Stern but. Music whereas the brothers throw metaphor allegory and ties depression's America into the mix Willow Brother where Area Peterson has taken Homer at some SOU just not time frame what appears to take a place in a very vigorous week and actually unfolded over a decade in the Iliad and it's some details eye-popping affair no question a gladiator had a lot to do with Troy reaching the screen there's almost a checklist of similarities between the two movies yet another undistinguished score from Jam Sarner is prepared with an unreached female voice for that inspectional creative decision to take above griditor co-composer and a singer Lisa Garrett whose stars being quite barren and take homage the digital effects are all present and cracked and rendered somewhat less impressive. By the casual wave of the hand and the words are it's all done and computer nowadays the phrase I hear a few times coming out of the semi-literally knowledge daily cops pick off that these nowadays photorealistic ancient grace was wondrous to behold but what of a character the truly surprising aspect of a draw is the absence of the straight down of the line. Music. Good guy and bad guys there are various passed by peace-loving a king's impassionable youth and of course there's a more of home in the momenta there is a duo between Hector and Alessa and I was stunned to find that I wanted both of them to win. This is never a viable outcome in Soccer and Sandal Pigs, your heart goes out to both war warriors. Both have damned good reasons to fight and both pull out all the stops, but if you know the tiniest bit of the story, perhaps the word heel pops up unbeaten. You know who is coming out of the life, it was his character driving treat of Troy that I truly admired, even in the pre-production. The filmmakers must have known that Iraq was about to become a main player on the world stage forcing a war under the political microscopes, again. It's admirable that Petersen's war epic actually provide an audience with doubts, yes, there are lashings of Famichambo Hunter. Bloodshed, and lots of overtime for the software engineers. And there is doubt this can only be a good thing of these awful times we live in. Troy is a movie of Brad Pitt released in 2004, a history war movie. Let's review it. The line between a pinking spectacle and a overblown board is often as unclear as it is easily. Music. Frost. So it's no surprise that Wolfgang Petersen's Troy navigates the damagations like a drunk driver on a twisty to long highway. There are times when Troy is striking and engaging, however, at least as often it is flashed, there's really too much a story to cram into a music 165 minutes period. Yet, the movie seems longer than its plot the running length and fallout of the visual majesty that hundreds of millions of dollars can buy cannot obscure the profity and undisputable of major characters. Troy is loosely and emphasized loosely based on Homer Pa, the Iliad, which many educated viewers will have you read once probably in a high school literature course. David Bin of screenplay keeps most of the places and names, but it's a lot of what go charitably call a license. One of the more interesting changes is to place the Olympians in the background. Troy is a story of men alone, not for men and the gods. The filmmakers wanted this movie to follow in the footsteps of Braveheart and Gladiator rather than Clash of the Titans. For more money, it's the right decision. Most viewers will recognize at least part of music of the story take place around the year 1250 BC. Hammer Spam is believed to have been composed about 400 years later. Helen of Sparta, the daughter of Zeus and immortal, is said to be the most beautiful woman alive. When Paris of Troy accompanies his older brother Hector on a peace mission to Sparta, Paris and Helen fall for each other. The lovers flee to Trojan's sanctuary. While Helen's scorned husband, Minos encouraged his brother to rouse all of Greece to go to war with Troy. Led by the hero Achilles, the Greek attacked the valiant city with the possible exception of Hector, who is portrayed with depth and feeling by Eric Bana. The characters in Troy area proper thin, the biggest despite made is Brad Pitt sales, who is a minus personality, is overwhelmed by his bronze skins and bulking muscle. Despite having Pula for the part, Brita defines the term miscast Alice as a lifeless central figure as one likely to find. Orlando Bloom's Paris and Diane Kruger's Helen fall into the same pretty but personality-free zone. The sparks are left to the veterans, in particular Peter Otto, the Asteroid King Prime, who employs his limited screen time to fashion a memorable character. In the end, only wishes the film had been focused on the King of Troy rather than the Greek hero. Troy is chock full of majestic battle scene, none of which generated a whiff of energy or suspense. Some might argue that it's hard to make a battle exciting when the end is already known. Those familiar with mythology know what happened when the Trojan horse makes side appearances. But I disagree. I had read Tolkien's book long before viewing Peter Jackson's admission of The Lord of the Rings and was still riveted by the epic battle sequence. Likewise, my cognition of what happened at Gettysburg did not diminish my appreciation of Roland Maxwell's historical accurate retelling. What here straw is that there's no imagination or energy to the battle. All we see is the clash between two largely faceless armies hacking at each other. The conflict, like many of the prominent characters like a personality Peterson's Harding of the one-on-one fight, Peter of Lost Hector versus Ajax, Hector versus Achilles, is more successful. Troy was an expensive movie to make and a lot of the money is on the screen. The special effects are well integrated into the live-action charts. The scene of 1,000 ships sailing to Troy is all-inspiring. So we don't experience the kind of visual disconnect that often accompanies identifying the presence of computer-narrated images. Music: James Hardner Bumstick score is a disappointment, accompanied however easily his worst work is more than 2 decades on cinematographer Rock Plate's lancing of the battle singer, so would be more impressive if he was not inadvertently competing with the recent memories of similarly faced encounters in The Two Towers and The Return of the King. Despite his shortcoming, there are things to appreciate about Troy, not the least of which is that it's aimed at adult, not children, are rare at the Amida Summer Fair, and since it's incarnately fond of historically based epics, even thought little is known about the real Troy. I was entertained more often than not, but it seems to me that if a viewer is going to invest nearly 3 hours, he or she deserves more than what Troy delivers. The best epics work because they provide you both visual spectacle and emotional renown, and the sound part of that question is where Troy falls short. Traity love stories such as the Onia between Achilles and the Slavkar and Nobly speeches are not enough. Peterson understand the importance of believably character as he proved in his landmark, but expecting Hector and Crimea, he fails to bring these mythological figures to life on the screen, and that more than anything else proves to be this film's enduring. Directed by Wolfgang Peterson, cinematography Roger Breit, Troy Trojan. Prince Paris Bloom steals Helen Kruger from the Spartan king, prompting the latter to go running to his brother Agamencox, king of the Greeks, with his umbrellas bent. Agamemnon launches a full-scale war against Troy, which catapults his hero Achilles Brad Pitt into confrontation with Trojan champion Hector as the Karen parts pick at the crosses across his summer's box office battlefield. The fiscal hawks at Warner Bros. Will be offering nervously over that. The occupied Wolfgang Peterson with $175 million plus just to launch this file of famous faces and bloating battle sequence. Yet beneath his muscle-bound armored shell, Troy is as hollow as the wooden hearts, which was not necessarily a mean that Troy will get slaughtered on the international box office. Peterson would have launched a far more effective assault if he had deviated still further from his harm source. Troy is undone by the Iliad central concedes, which is true, and Erostic the director appears aware of this fact, waving into the substantial downtime between set pieces repeated assertion of the reason for the war. Ellen and Paris love answering question of the audience has not raised and Therbia, indicating a near fatal legal confidence. Music. In his sourcea material that two powerful nations would go to a war simply because Paris Nagaskara Foundation in the age the tale was originally told as the natural intention of the hero called the ancient concepts ensured that the intended audience perceived the hammered Hartman as heroes first, Trojan or Greece second. Their action expression of no extent ideology today fighting a war for love and horror seems maffish and leaves the modern audience wandering fish side to theatre. A. Patterson does expand Brian Cox, a delightfully spiteful Eggman, investing him with an imperial that could have pro'd the war, but the repeated affirmation of Paris and Helen self-igniting the campaign deals a warming subtext. Similarly, the area's other great theme, the pathos of Elle's fate, also fails to translate, with Peterson's unsure how to handle this delicate premise. Again, it was the nation of hero Corda that underpinned action, and Homer was facilitated in his tale by having the god's poverty his hero's destiny, adding a divine note to the emotional chart. Peterson quite rightly omits the Olympians, only introducing the immortal matter to relay her son's fate. But her visit is so fleeting that the importance of her message desperata. Music. As the crescendo looms, burning Pitt with an impossible task, Pitt makes full use of his many close-up, his intensely physical form and heroic posturing, scapulating agitating parabra, a knife he fails to convince as the climax approaches. It's only because his motivation has been made for bait. By contrast, Eric Bana's Stronica champion Hector, unshackled by Eagle's luffy premise, swashes his buckle as an embodiment of a nobility that is command empathy. Orlando Bloom's sympathy with music, told providing much of the epic gravitas. The women, however, are less effective, and the wild Anne Gregor's Highland could launch than GR2 She is far too ripped to launch 1,000 ships, which is a shame, as the 1,000 ships are a CG marvelous example of Troy's production values. The moment the two armies clash outside the walls rival at any battle in Lord of the Ring, and the individual combat especially between Hector and Els is madly impressive. Through a simple striking fight, a geography piddles at last become a fully realistic cinematic take on a major hero-brushing battle, and some starring performances make draw enjoyable. Rather long, but audience can't forgive the camp they still struggle to emphasize with the character Troy, the Brad Pitt of despair here. Finally got around to watching the movie Troy a new other night. I just could not get around to seeing it in the theater. A lot of it was pretty good. The battle scenes were spectacular but repetitive. I thought Eric Bana as Hector was marvelous. The two Lord of the Ring alumni Orlando Bloom as Paris and Signbeam as Odysseus was also very good. The role of Paris in particular in the taxless one, and Orlando made it work. Peter O'Toole seems to have moved into the spot Richard Harris used to occupy as early a veteran actor best suited to playing a king in a costume drama. The scene where he begged at least for Hector's body was the most moving in the entire piece, but what rank casting a director hired Brad Pitt to play Achilles? Don't get me wrong, I like to look at Brad Pitt just as much as on the other. Music. hetero female. He's even a pretty good actor. I adore his Lucia in Interview with the Vampire, but all the least common bass aside, Brad has very nice bips. I'll give you that. He is just not by any scratch of the imagination. The music a right actor to play ages. Have you read the Iliad? I have. Okay, not lately. But I did read it. Achilles is an invincible prude who lives for war and glory. I picturing Van Diesel in Pitch Black. That's a Pitch Black, not Joy Black, or maybe Thea Rock. Maybe he's a winger, but he was a thirsty. Is certainly better suited to a play at Elise. Music, and he is for his CR job. And where did Hector's cousin, Thea Virgin Priestess, come from? I don't seem to remember her from the Iliad. Wassa. Music a she an attempt to make Achilles' love for his cousin Patrick look a platonic, fairly watchable. 2 stars. Ultimately disappointing. Every time Peter was on the screen, I kept wondering what the casting director was thinking. I also kept wishing that Thea do part 2 with Scene Bean. I was puzzled by your reference to a Hector cousin the Virgin Priests and Thea have not seen the film. However, some internet research tells me that Thea character is in fact Breeze, Basis was not a virgin princess and her, not a cousin of Hector, but she was a very significant, music a character. Troy. What happened to Helen after Thea movie? The 2004 film Troy focuses on the valid aftermath of Helen's escapes to Troy, but never revealed what happened to her after Paris was killed and Thea city was sacked by the Greeks. Troy is loosely based on Homer's epic poem, the Iliad, which narrates the quarrel between Achilles and Ecmon. In the final weeks of the 10 years the Trojan War, after Paris falls in love with Thea married Helen of Sparta, he smuggles Hero back to Troy with him and accidentally kicks off a violent and bloody war with the Greeks led by her harvestmen Menelaus. Helen is a central figure in Troy and the Trojan War after. Music. Her escape from Sparta portrayed in Troy as a very stable home. Although Sparta is depicted in the movie 300 as cruel and ruthless, and becomes a princess of Troy and slowly begins to love her new city. Troy ends with Hyland and her new sister-in-law Andro helping the Trojan escape through tunnels beneath the city and seems to imply that Hyland stays with the Trojans after birth. Still her fate at the end of Troy is unclear. So what actually happened to Helen after the Trojan War? The most definitive account of Helen's fate is in Homer's poem The Odyssey, which reveals that she returned to Sparta and reunited with Menelaus. In both the Iliad and the Odyssey, Homer leaves it. Music a guess so as to whether Helen went to Troy willingly or if she was abducted. When she reappears in the Odyssey, she seems happy to have returned home with her husband. Homer's account of Helen's face shows her to be an older and wiser queen of Sparta and that she had a peaceful music reconciliation with Menelaus after her betrayal. However, Helen's fate varies in other accounts in Greek mythology. While Homer definitely shows Hera returning to Sparta, the era's tragedy, and the Trojan women depicts Helen also returning to Greece to face a death sentence. Troy shows Helen growing closer to Adrimage and the other women in Troy, but the Trojan women shows her also being shunned by them. Other variations of Helen's fate shows up in Aurea states which claims that Helen was rescued by the god Apollo immediately after the fall of Troy and was taken to Mount Olympus. Troy is only loosely based on all the Iliad and structures the events of the Trojan War to make the movie more entertaining and bombastic. Troy depicts Helen as a lover-struck young woman who came with Paris willingly and leaves her fate unknown, although implying that she stayed with the Trojans after helping them escape the city. Although most Greek mythology shows Helen eventually returning to Greece one way or another, the Helen depicts in Troy seems to be embarking on a whole new adventure. Troy. Why Achilles cried after killing Hector. Music in 2004. Troy Ailes leads the Trojan prince Hector and drags him through the dust to the Tenon Cap, but why does he weep over his corpse? Wolfgang Petersen's loosely adapted radiation of Homer's The Iliad. Troy stars Brad Pitt as the Greek hero Ailes and evokes the tragedies that befell during the Trojan War. After killing Hector, Troilus says, We will meet again, my brother. Willie, this particular instance does not take place in the Iliad. Achilles. Tears area focal point in the epic poem, especially when he sits together with the king Priam and weeps over Priam and Patrick. While Priam mourns the loss of Hector to understand why Achilles, an almost invulnerable demigod, cries after killing Hector, who had slain a close wartime companion, Protocola. Music needs to understand the dam of war in the Iliad. While on the one hand war brings glory or catmur for men, on the other it is a source of fear, pain and a human suffering, for at least fighting in a war against the Trojan is a mark of honor and heroic mettle. However, it also brings him extraordinary grief, as exemplified in the poem. Once Achilles has worn out his sorrow, the desire of tears leave at the same time his heart and his body. Unlike the classical portrayal of heroic figures as killing machines, Homer's epic celebrates their innate humanity. Music. While employing them with honor, fidelity, and agony. Coming back to Troy, viewers see Gleeson arrive outside the gates of the city and challenge Hector to a duel where the latter fights admirably the god's favourite, who ends up killing Hector, attaching his ankle to his chariot and dragging him to the Trojan beach. What happened next could possibly be a cut for tears. Music. King Priam snakes into the Greek camp and discues and implores him to honor his son through a proper funeral. Constance refuses, stating that Hector's death is of retribution for the murder of Protocol. To this Priam refutes that Protocol's death was a case of mistaken identity, while reminding Ailes of his own war-fueled cruelty. How many cousins have you killed? How many sons and fathers and brothers and husbands? How many brave Achilles? Overcome with guilt and shame. Achilles agrees to attend the truce in order to music facilitate Hector's funeral resides. He acknowledges Hector's tactical prowess on the battlefield and deems him as a worthy opponent, kneeling over his corpse at least justice, which could potentially symbolize the Greek hero's realization of the fidelity of war. Music. And the possibility of respectful counter-heap between the two in the absence of the feud over Helen. Apart from this, he is also accurately aware of his imminent death. Hence the sentiment of meeting Hector again on the edge of the river Styx. Music. Which was believed to be a boundary between Earth and the underworld, as anticipated triad with the death of who is shot with a passing arrow by Paris in the heel. Music. His only spot of vulnerability against everything I felt in my being. My Orlando Bloom regrets making historical the epic with Brad Pitt. Troy star Orlando Bloom candidly reflects on his experience filming the 2004 film directed by Wolfgang Petersen. Troy chronicles the infernal seeking of the titular city by the Greeks in 1250 BCE. The film, which stars Brad Pitt, Diane Kruger, Brian Cox, Eric Bana and Cena Bin, features Bloom in the role of Paris, the Prince of Troy, and younger brother to Bana's Hector. In a recent interview for Freddie Known Their Line as a video series, Bloom struggled to identify one of his character's line from Troy, ultimately revealing that he doesn't look back at this time in the movie fondly. Music. According to the actor, he just could not relate to the character he was playing. Check out Bloom's full statement. Music. Oh my god, Troy. Oh, I think I just blanked that movie out of my brain. By the way, so many people love that movie. But for me, playing that character was just like Music. Slit throats. Am I allowed to say all of these things? I didn't want to do the movie. I didn't want to play the character. Music. The movie was great. I was Brad Pitt, was Erica and Peter told. But how am I going to play his character? I was completely against. Music. Everything I felt in my being. At one point it says Paris cross along the floor having been beaten by somebody and hold his brother's leg. Music. I was like, I'm not going to be able to do this. One of my agents at the time said, but that's the moment that I will make it, and I completely fell for the line of agent. I think that's why blanked that from my mind. Orlando Bloom's Troy? Music. Commensa explained. Paris is far from a topical hero character in a historical epic. Music. He has the physical attributes of a hero, but he is ultimately a character with a great deal of weakness. Throughout the film, Paris is not sad and inclusive. Music, and Ed Bloom explains. There's one scene in which he crawls away from what is supposed to be one on Onia due to the death in order to cover up Hector's feet. Paris is also essentially responsible for the Trojan War, which is kidnapping of Helen in a bold act of love. Music. Paris may end up getting a hero moment at the end of Troy when he kills but the character is probably best remembered for all his moment of weakness and his poor decisions. Some actors would revel in the opportunity to play such a flawed character. Bloom was clearly being music, positioned as a strong leading man in the early 2000s. He rose to form with a role as Legolas in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and just before he also played Will Turner in the first part of The Caribbean. Both Legolas and Turner are stronger traditional Hollywood heroes, and Thea set the actor up for these types of roles moving forward. Music. Paris is perhaps an example of why some big Hollywood actors are reported to have clause in their music contract preventing them from losing a fight. Paris may end up getting a hero moment at the end of Troy when he kills Achilles, but the character is probably best remembered for all his moments of weakness and music. His poor decisions. For an actor like Bloom during the early 2000s, the role is really the opposite of how he was being positioned in Hollywood. Was Troy worth the struggle for Orlando Bloom? While playing Paris in Troy may have been a challenge for music. Bloom and not a project that I particularly enjoyed, it could certainly be worth if the movie had a measurably positive music impact in his career. Their views for Troy, however, were mixed up with their music. Critics mostly agreeing there's a little substance beneath all the movie spectacle. Music. As a result, the film currently has a lackluster score of 53% on Rotten Tomatoes. The mixed reception to Troy in the box office underperformance of music. Kingdom of Happen, which Bloom stars in the years after, might actually explain why the actor's biggest hits in the years afterward are almost exclusively Practice of the Caribbean and the Hobbit sequel. Despite a less than stellar reception, Troy was a box office hit. Music. The movie grossed close to $500 million worldwide, with the spectacle and star power of figures like Brad Pitt, Bana and Bloom evidently a draw. Music. Despite this, however, the movie has not really lived on music. In popular culture, Gladiator, for example, another sword and sandal type movie, made a little less than Troy at the box office. Troy's screen test made Diane Kruger feel like me. Diane Kruger reveals that she felt like me during a screen test for the Iliad-inspired film Troy. The model-turned actor has had a long career in Hollywood, which notable roles in The Necklace, Cagelot, National Treasure, Canteen Churches, Alternate History, War Film, and Glorious Bastards, and most recently the 2022 action film The 355 as a German secret agent. Kruger is slated to star in the upcoming Roku Channel limited drama series Swimming with the Sharks, a remake of the 1994 comedy of the same name. Kruger started in the sword and sandal epic Troy as the famed and saint Greek mythological character Helen of Troy. Music. A woman renowned for her beauty whose kidnapping led to the Trojan War as music, depicted in a Homer story. She was joined by Ocean's 11 star Brad Pitt as the famed hero, Alice Lord of the Rings, Orlando Bloom as Highland's secret lover Paris, and X-Men 2's Brian Cox as music. King's Eggman. The film was one of the highest-grossing movies of 2004, making nearly $500 million at the box office. In a recent interview with Friday, the German actor says that she felt like a piece of meat during her audition for the 2004 Wolfgang Petersen film Rye. During an initial screening for her part, Kruger were asked to text for an executive in a full historical-inspired fart draw. I remember testing for Helen of Troy and having to go to the studio hiding a costume, and I felt like me being locked up and down and was asked question like, yeah, why do you think music you should be playing this? Hollywood industry insiders explained that music Screen test area generally filmed and then later videoed by pertinent members of the production. It is not a typical experience for an actor to have a personal ward job tested for a studio executive, although Kruger declined to reveal the name of the executive in questions that further explained that during her time in Hollywood, she has definitely come across the Weinstein of the word from the get-go, referring to Harvey Weinstein, the infamous co-head of the Weinstein Company who sexually assaulted over 80 women over his decades as a major film producer. Kruger began her career as a model in the mid-90s and claims she has previously been placed in inappropriate and uncomfortable situation, stating, music I think when I first started out, you just feel like music. This is what it's like. This is what Hollywood is like. In an exploit scene from Kruger's upcoming Scolical series, Swimming with Sharks, her character had to please her sickly boss by performing an act on a young female nurse. Music. The actor released the scene to hear experience and observation over the years as music and actor in the industry, saying, shooting that scene was just a reminder of how disgusting and execrable body behavior was at music. Certain time in our society, not just Hollywood. Although Harvey Weinstein was arrested in 2018 and convicted in 2020 on rampant sexual assault charges, Hollywood and society have a long way to go to acknowledge its past wrongs. Music, and to make efforts to ensure that such despicable things ever happen again, despite the humiliating situation she was put through. She was praised for her pivotal role in Troy, a film that was generally panned by critics at the time. Kruger's upcoming series Swimming with Sharks stream on the Roku channel on April 15. Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey movie needs to avoid one flaw that hurt Brad Pitt's Troy. Christopher Nolan's movie The Odyssey needs to learn from the biggest flaws of Brad Pitt's Troy while capturing the numerous strength. Since the success of Oppenheimer's, fans have waited to see what's next for the visionary actor. A year ahead of its release, Christopher Nolan has given audience a glimpse of his 2026 movie, The Odyssey, which adapts the titular raping plan by Homer, a passionate Greek mythology fan. I am excited to see how Nolan brings the story to the big screen, an excellent film for Christopher Nolan to reference when creating The Odyssey in the music 2004 film Troy starring Brad Pitt. Troy is an entertaining film that captures the gintering feelings of Mercer writing. The film is beautifully choreographed and it displays excellent attention to detail when it comes to cultural accuracy. Music at The Odyssey massive budget will allow the creative team to make a film of the same skill, music, and detail. However, Christopher Nolan's 2026 film must divorce from Troy in one massive way, avoiding the film's biggest mistake. Christopher Nolan's Odyssey needs the Greek gods. Although Brad Pitt's Troy technically worked as a story with Hector the ghost and goddesses, it was a huge mistake to consider it an adaptation of the Iliad, separate from the source material. Troy is a fun movie, however, the film not only changes fundamental parts of the characters, but it also leaves out the Greek gods and goddess. The letter choice, music, feels criminal to anyone who enjoys Hammer's epic poem, and it caused numerous negative film reviews. Although many can start Christopher Nolan's upcoming film a sequel to Troy, music at The Odyssey cannot make the same mistake as Brad Pitt's Troy. The 2026 sequel must integrate the Greek music, gods and a goddess into the story instead of fast-striping the source material of a core element, music. It feels intrinsically wrong to adapt a Greek myth without these characters, and their inclusions would give the film more reach. Greek mythology remains popular because the music ties are morally complex and reflect the human condition. Why Brad Pitt's Troy did the Iliad without the gods? The decision to leave the Greek gods and a goddess out of Troy is perplexing, considering they were present throughout the Iliad. Many publications and audience members have seeded over the past 2 decades about the reason why Brad Pitt didn't include the god, saying that he wanted a more grounded, human-centric perspective on the war. However, the only relay source I could found that provides cartoons from the creative team about the Lake of God and Goddesses in Troy comes from a 2004 article in the Globe and Mail. Screenwriter David Bana of Music told the publication it was such a genius as writing for his contemporaries with depth and music at the entertainment. It's very good. I think if he would have looked down on us today, I think that he would smile and he would say, "Take the gods out." Music. He then cried that he would get struck down by Zeus for not including him in Troy, which in all fairness fits with the god characterization in Greek mythology. No matter his reasoning, Bana's decision weakened the depiction of the Trojan War, which heavily involved deities from the Greek mythology. Unfortunately, this interview doesn't provide a concrete answer about his mindset when making the decision. His statement implies that he thinks music Greek gods and goddesses are not contemporary, which ignores that their stories have remained popular for many millennia. Additionally, the statement that Homer would have been okay with the modernization feels music questionable. Ultimately, it doesn't matter why major conflict would exist. Odysseus would not overcome his obstacle. Ultimately, the director would be better off taking creative liberties. They don't involve removing the gods and goddesses. There are many ways to be creative with a story that doesn't fundamentally alter music. The Odyssey. Christopher Nolan making a sequel to this $497 million historical epic is actually way better than the real sequel happening. Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey is now one of the most anticipated movies coming in the next couple of years and is inexorably tried to alter project when it is based on widely used source material. Heart of Family winning an Oscar for the Best Picture winner of Oppenheimer. Nolan is making an author-gender part into Greek mythology with an adaptation of the fantasy action epic, or originally the epic bound The Odyssey by Homer. The RC's cast is incredibly impressive, with Matt Damon confirmed to be in the lead role in both regular and first-time Nolan collaborators on board. With this star-studded cast and launch a skill for sweeping large-scale visual music masterpieces, there is overwhelming reason to be excited about The Odyssey. In 2027, we could be referring to this as Christopher Nolan's new best movie, even if Oppenheimer is tough to beat. However, the narratives of the Iliad and the Odyssey bought by Homer have been adapted before. Rather than setting up competition for Nolan's latest project, Music 2026, The Odyssey is likely to be the unofficial and much better sequel to Music, an average at best example. How Christopher Nolan The Odyssey works as a sequel to Troy. Nolan's The Odyssey will work as a kind of sequel to Troy, the 2004 blockbuster depicting the Trojan War, starring Brad Pitt as Achilles and Eric Bana as Hector, who DC is the main character of The Odyssey, also appears in this movie, played by Cena Bean. According to legend, the Trojan War began due to the kidnapping of Helen, the wife of Menlo, by the Trojan prince Paris. Subsequently, many Greek warriors and royals were called upon to seek to try to get her back, including Odysseus. Troy showcases the inevitable confrontation between and Hector, and at the end of the Trojan War, the Odysseus narratives is what happened after the war is over. As Odysseus attempts to get home to his family, but angers the god Poseidon, who uses all his power to prevent Odysseus from music ever reaching again. The character presence in Troy is something of an to the Odysseus, while Odysseus plays an important music part in the Trojan War. He has his own story that will happen in the aftermath. Music. Christopher Nolan can make a much better Troy sequel than the real one would be. Troy never got a sequel, which was probably for the best. The blockbuster is entertaining, but it is shies away from depicting the most brutal parts of the Trojan War, which drives home the message of the devastation resulting from pride and jealousy, among other things. Music Ales ends up in a highly romanticized and non-clinical romantica subplot with Bryce. Music A captive Trojan women and nearly all of the members of the Trojan royal family survive and escape. It's a high-budget movie but ultimately empty, where Nolan is known for lording his stunning visuals with effective thematic weight, non-struction and demons performance area likely to showcase the true individual. Music Unforgettable to the War and the journey. Essentially, if the Odyssey is a sequel to Troy, it is probably going to be much better than what the Rella sequel to Troy would have been. Nolan instruction and demons performances area likely to showcase the true individual sentiment to the war and the music journey with much more mounted a character art all around. In fact, some are wondering if Nolan should have made the Iliad into a movie first. While the Odyssey works fine as a standalone, anyone would want to see what Nolan would do with the music often tragic carpets of Greek mythology, and no matter which specific tale, Troy is the movie that is released. Music in 200 stars Brad Pitt as a main character also least. I remember when this movie first came out, I was really eager to see it, but unfortunately, music it could not because it was rated R and it was unfortunately not 16 at the time. Ended up watching The Day After Tomorrow, which was actually not a body replacement, but that's a story for another day. Subsequently, I have watched Troy a few times since and honestly cannot understand why it is not a bigger phenomenon and doesn't have a larger cultural status. Okay, basic plot. After years of battle, the nations of Troy and Sparta negotiate a truce, striking Menelaus, ruler of Sparta, and the two Trojan prince. Music Hector and Paris. This truce is broken when Prince Paris smuggles Milo's wife Helena from Sparta. This betrayal plays perfectly into the plans of King Menelaus' brother, who has long-had desires to conquer Troy and family has a reason to go on the warpath. Agamemnon gather an army the size of which has ever existed and music says to try ready to conquer. Amongst Agamemnon's forces is Achilles, the greatest warrior in Greek history, will fight not for his music king, but rather his own personal glory. As the greatest battle in history approaches, it soon become clear, music that both glory and doom await all involved. The reason why I cannot figure out why this movie was not more successful is because of the waste quantity of qualities possesses. Music This is a film with almost no flaws where every aspect of it from direction to acting, music to music composition is beautifully crafted. My favorite thing about this film is its script. Also, with the majority of films classified as epics, music the dialogue in this piece is magnificent. It's filled with the arrogant crime that comes with period dramas, but is also extremely disguised and avoids being overly verbose. The way the characters are written and the way they fit into the plot is also rest. There are no real protagonist or antagonist in this film really, or rather should I say the film doesn't limit itself to only having one in either category. Nick is the central figure and this is his story for all intents and purposes, but the story is also told from the view pairs of several other characters. Ekman. Music. Hector, Paris and his stolen bride Helen all features heavily, and we get to see the films unfold through their eyes as much as from a script also never focus uses until choosing a site to root for. We are given insight into both the Greeks and the Pragues. Music, with the flaws and the strength of both being showcased, but both are presented. Music, equally and with no incarnation. So you are left free to choose who to support. Now just because you are not guided into picking a side does it mean that you don't become emotionally attached to the characters. That's the beauty of these film. It never, music, limits your emotional connection to the characters because it never makes you see one side as good or bad. A close second on my list of favorite feature about this film has to be its cast. Music. It's an assembled cast and one that is handled with super balance and music antagonist. The problem with all-star casts is that often the star power of the actor overpowers the strength of the character. This is not a problem in Troy because it's clearly evident that the screen time each character receives is due to the needs of the story and noted the demands of the actor. A great job is also done with the makeup and costume design because often the characters are unrecognizable. Furthermore, the entire cast comments so devoutly to their portrayal of their character. Music, that you see only the characters and not the superstar behind them. The film is filled with superstars Brad Pitt, Eric Bana, Brian Cox, Brandon Gleeson, music Orlando Bloom, Diane Kruger, Peter Rowe. Every member of the cast produced a stellar performance with Brad Pitt and Eric Bana being the cream of the crop. Brad Pitt is a masterclass of acting. He perfectly embodies the music, arrogance and undeniable charm of the legendary warrior, while also putting a divine turn at music. Hector, Achilles and Hector are like two sides of the same coin. Music, with Hector's sensibility and humility serving as the perfect fuel to Achilles. Music P and B have limited time on screen together, but the brief moments they share are remarkable. Music the first being an introductory encounter where Hector is eager to fight, but at least delays there. Music inevitable confrontation, explaining that it's too early in the day of killing a princess. Music when the pair do eventually square off and results in an accelerating fight sequence. Music, the fight between the two is one of my favorite movie fight scenes of all time. The choreography is fast-paced and filled with danger and excitement. You generally fear for both parties and the result of the fight is hard-earned and beautifully constructed. The squaring of the fire scene is majestic with music composer James Horn here rising the bar to extraordinary heights. Director Wolfgang Petersen does a great job using wide camera angles and keeping the cuts to a minimum to ensure optimal viewing of the splendor. Now while Troy is a glorious film, it's not without its flaws. After Eagles and the actor have their battle, the film clearly runs out of both steam and purpose and spotted to its end. The film is just over 2.5 hours long, but because of its steady music passing action-packed battles and engrossing dialogue, it moves along quite nicely and you never feel the length. The depth of the story more than justifies its runtime. But the conclusion of the film is leaking the thrills and excitement of the scene as that came before it. It feels like the film used up all its energy on the fight between Achilles and Hector, and forget that it still had another 3/4 of an hour to go. Overall, Troy is a wonderful epic crafted music, with real care and quality. Brad Pitt and Eric Bana shine the brightest among a cast filled with radiant stars. David. Music Bana produced a marvelous script which Wolfgang Petersen brings to life. Music, sensationally, the film is a musty 8 out of 10. Troy 2001, music loosely based on Homer's work of Greek mythology Iliad. This sweeping epic drafted by Wolfgang Petersen as the Paraforce won an outbreak is something of a disappointment. Music. That it contains some spectacular set battles and a constant protocol during his portrait farewell to his father. Music Eagles is still blowing Hector predictably from outside the city and it's implied that he does this as long as Hector takes to get out there, which is quite some time. Orlando Bloom is still a very green actor here, looking occasionally like a lost puppy. Likely Bloom has grown as an actor since then, but it's kind of funny to see him in a role that it doesn't work around it. There's a nudity to mythology presence of the sort of tritoness on the flight from the city and some gorgeous set pieces even if they were not the most historically accurate. Music there's also some slow-mo shorts which racked me up every time I saw theme and music. Big revelations come after he sees someone carving a little horse. Of course, it's a pretty solid movie whose bad parts are music, hilariously bad, which is not a bad problem to have. Troy is an enjoyable over-the-top epic period far film with an all-star cast with varying degrees of success and some gorgeous scenery. I could do without the rants slow-mo shoots. It's a solid movie with good parts and music. Hilariously bad parts which is not a bad problem to have at all. Worth a watch. You can rent it the DVD. The ending of Troy. Music. Troy is the embodiment of this line delivers from the hero of Homer's Odyssey, for his young men dying and old men talking, ignore the politics. Odysseus console his friend and follow soldier Achilles, and also fate would have it. It's painfully relevant when married up with our own modern dry global conflicts. Men in power often weave far more in a torturous circle of death and greed. Troy is an adaptation of Homer's Iliad chronicling the seeking of Troy by the ancient Greece. While many historians over the years have post-war teased the validity of Homer's approach potentially being rooted in ancient history, there still is not any clear credence behind such a claim via BBC. Therefore, the Trojan War remains a staple of ancient Greek mythology. Troy. Music. Depicts Paris, a love-struck young prince of Troy, ventingly giving way to his heart's desire to free Helen from her violent and crock-pot-panicking husband. Men lost even amid peace talks between Sparta and Troy. He foolishly absconds with Helen tied aboard his boat when he has an older brother, Prince Hector, and the Trojan party depart for home. This sends Manoa to a rig, destroying any lasting desire to maintain peace. Music. With Troy. He courts his brother, King Agamemnon of Phamaca, to go to war with him. Music. Happily, Agamemnon calls the armies of all of the kingdom under his stats to go to a war. He even convinced Russells, a champion among the Greeks, to join the cause, even if just. Music. For the glory. This tale of love, war, and a tragedy has a lot to deject, so let's get to music. The glory of Far is a man who answer to no one nor demonic kings, at least that is what he claims. Music. Sure, he does have an a distance for Agamemnon and is not shy about it, calling the greedy monarch out for the fifth that he, music, is straight to his face, yet at least still shows up when Agamemnon demands it. But music. ISO because Agamemnon commands the warrior who leads the Iliad Meridians, or to some other reason, Achilles makes no secret of it. He wages battle often at the behest of Agamemnon. Music. Simply for the glory. Combat is all he has ever known, so he cannot very well make the carrier in anything else. Music. However, practice make progress, and since combat has been the single focus of his entire life, he is damn near a music. Perfection. Agamemnon hates Iliad but understand he needs the warrior. He know that Exlit will not his biting just because he commands it. Music. Instead, the king listened to his advisor and tangles the carrot of Gloria in X's face. Essentially, most of X's entire career has been one big manipulation of the king of man, using the various greatest desire to be remembered for his music. Exploits in order to secure his sword amid his campaign to conquer Greek music kingdoms. But of course, Achilles is no idiot. He understands the manipulation which music is why he disdained the king. He does not agree with Agamemnon's methods or politics, but he notes a reach for his own neutrality. After creating a lasting memory that counts throughout the ages is the only true way to gain immortality and live on forever. Paris and Heron's forbidden love was always going to cost Troy a heavy price, but it's most exorbitant ignored Agamemnon's motive. The king of machine has no interest music in defending his brother's honor, or at least for shady of it the man truly has. In fact, music. Paris absconding with the queen of Sparta is a gift of Agamemnon. It gives him a music fate to hide behind as he eagerly accepts his brother's plea to go to war with Troy. Melis only fights for his music ego. His pride is shattered when Paris stole his perceived property, which is music. Extremely how he treated Helen. Melis would engage in unprompted equality with the other women in this court. In fact, he explicitly tells Hector that his wife Helen is just for breeding. When Agamemnon assures his brother that they'll get music his wife back, Mal states that he only wants her back so that he can kill her with his own hands. In other words, this war is being by men who fancy themselves as gods among men. Music. Their greed is to produce all and no number of attempts to take reconciliation with Sparta from Troy's upper equal foot to music. The fall of Troy is distant from the moment Agamemnon comes to power, while Helen may be the catastrophic Agamemnon would have found another reason if her romance with Music. Paris ever occurred. Homer's Iliad and creative liberty essa. Music. Troy feels like a truly grounded dwarf depicting a moment in history, Buddha in all actuality. Music. It's an adaptation of Homer's Iliad. Thea first in a pair of epic Greek poems authored by Homer in the 8th Music a century BC. The film shared Homer's use of the god in the tale and only depicted the man in the story as God-fearing. Furthermore, try to a few other irregularities with the material. In the film, Protalus is the cousin of Atlas. The Vari act as somewhat of an older brother to Proclus and teaches him all he knows in the art of combat and war. Music. When Proclus is killed, his death entails Achilles, who kills Hector in retaliation. The Iliad never mentions that Proclus and music. Achilles are related. In fact, it often depicts them as close friends and passionary, even romantically. Music. Intertwined. The length of the war is perhaps the most inauguration of Homer's original work. The film depicts a war that lasts days, maybe weeks at best. Music. Troy is a city with mighty BS and is primed for a lengthy defense during war. The Iliad shares that the S of Troy lasted an entire decade. Furthermore, the film depicts Agamemnon's victory as short-lived when the priest uncertainly ends his life. But is the actual story? He survived the Trojan War and is only later murdered by his wife. Music. Helen, the queen at the center of it all, is said to have been married off to men lost at a young age by her parents. However, Helen was actually the daughter of the king and queen of Sparta, making her royalty before her nobles. Music. With men loss, love transcendent reason. One of the primary theme of the film is love. Music. Some interpret the story of the Iliad as more of an abduction than an actual love affair, making Paris applied infinity less noble weary history. Music. Still, Troy accurately depicts the Trojan War as being the result of Helen's removal from Sparta because of Paris. Like the Shakespearean tragedy of Romeo and Juliet, the film depicts a love that stars above reason. Perhaps love does truly make us do foolish things. But in music, Paris case, he is responsible for the death of countless men on the battlefield for his actions. Music. And it's not like he could have not foreseen those consequences either. Hector wisely advised his brother to stay away from Helen during their time in Sparta. Even the Paris lies his teeth about sleeping with the wife of Famulus actor is no slouch. He knows exactly what is going on and even threaten his brother should we jeopardize the safety and security of their home in Troy. Yet Paris still does the unthinkable regardless calling Hector's bluff. Music. Hector does care for his brother and despite his fury over the intersection, he aims to music. Protect him by returning to Troy and preparing for war. The question on everyone's mind for young Paris after the film's wraps: was it worth it? Music. It seems even as he guarded the survivor through the mountain pass that he would do it all over again given the opportunity. Women are second-class citizens. Music. In the time of ancient Greece, it seems Achilles was not quite invented yet. Even in modern times, equality is a struggle. But in the ages when corrupt men had all the power over nations, women were often treated poorly. Troy. Music. Depicts this fold with the famous villain Seminoles and Agens. Music. As we have previously covered, Minal only regarded his own wife as a tool for bearing music children, otherwise he'd violate his power and authority to sleep with whomever wanted it. Music. To the kingdom of Sparta, Agamemnon doesn't do much better in his treatment of priestesses, constraining her nothing more than the spice of war. Even the torture and heroes can hardly rein in his music emotions enough to stay dignified in his relationship with the priestesses. Not only does he hold her as a prisoner, but he also promises her that he music will not hurt her and takes breaks that promise when he flies into a rake over the death of his cousin. Music. And let's not forget the leadership of Athelsira when Prime holds consult with the elders and elites of Troy. Music. There's not a single woman among them. All women in this film are related to a love and trust or objects for the abuser. Music. depicted on screen. Even Helen is ultimately disrespected by her own lover Paris. How might you ask? Well, he never harms her physically or verbally abuses her. But he often refuses to allow her to use her own agency in matters of war. She feels our hesitancy to leave with the Paris because of the bloodshed that will result, but her voice ultimately falls on deaf ears. Troy is a story about the conflict of the egos of men and women, and children are the ultimate victims. Music, a betrayal of the gods. Homer's Iliad, a liberal use of the gods of the Greek pantheon for intense and prime attempts to sneak into the enemy camps. Music, and a plead with Achilles to return his son's body. He is guided by the god Hermes, a messenger to the rest of the gods and Olympus, but Troy does away with the gods in favor of a more grounded take on the Trojan War. Still, music, how the gods are still very much a part of the discussion among the film's characters. Eggman mostly considers himself a god among men and hardly regards any of the Greek deities. At least looks upon the servants of the gods as foolish. Whether he believes in the gods is up for debate. Music, but he is not afraid to discredit their temples, knowing that the gods have done nothing for him or his. Music. Lifetime. Pam is a devout believer in his priest and mystic who claim to have insight into omens. Music. And message from the gods on high. Hector sees the whims of the priest as foolish and illogical given the war in front of them. Using his head, he knows that strategy is key. Music, and that they should not give for sign from gods who care little for their fates. Yet Prime makes every decision. Music, based on what he perceives as the will of the gods, which ultimately causes him to lead Troy to ruin. Perhaps Prime is so devout that in his final moments he truly believed that Troy's destruction was the will of the gods. Either way, it's the searing and deserts of our piety given that the villainous Agamemnon wins the day without seeking diamond help, the gift of mortality. What would it be like to be a god? Otto first, you might fancy the identity given that you would be immortal and impervious to pain and sorrow. However, you'd only like to be invincible to pain, or because you know what pain is. Imagine you living only a life of music. Devote because you would not know pain or sorrow. That's mean you also would know joy and poor bliss. Music. It's a hard idea for us to wrap our minds around, but our moments of happiness are only effective because we have the backdrop of our fatality and sadness to compare them to. In effect, there would be no highs without any lows. Your story would be a stagnant straight line, and neither experiencing the worst nor best a life had to offer. In fact, you could not even say that it's truly music a living. At least understands this, perhaps is not only fight for glory, but for the feeling of being truly alive. Asadevast. The Var explained to the priestess twice the gods are not as important as everyone thinks they are. The gods envy us. They envy us because we are mortal, because any moment could be our last. Everything becomes more meaningful, as Achilles says. Everything is more beautiful because we are doomed. You will never be lovelier than you are now. You will never be here again. Through these words, he reflects on the fragile nature of life. In many ways, Achilles romanticizes pain and suffering, yet there is truth in his perspective. Once we truly understand that life is finite, we begin to appreciate its value on a much deeper level. Every moment becomes precious because it won't last forever. While Achilles' story nears its end, Odysseus' journey is only beginning. As the wise and capable king of Ithaca, he proves himself to be a trustworthy companion. Throughout the war, Odysseus often bends to Agamemnon's demands for the sake of protecting his own people. Despite fighting on the side that many viewers see as the antagonists, he remains an honorable man. His intelligence, strategic mind, and cunning nature make him one of the greatest heroes of Greek mythology. In fact, some of the wisest advice Achilles receives comes from his friend, Odysseus. Although Troy never received a sequel, one could easily imagine a follow-up based on the Odyssey, the second great Greek epic attributed to Homer. However, such a film would need to fully embrace Greek mythology, including its gods, monsters, and supernatural elements. After the fall of Troy, Odysseus begins his long and dangerous journey home. His voyage is filled with countless hardships that prevent him from returning to Ithaca for another 10 years. Much of his suffering stems from angering the sea god Poseidon. Along the way, his crew is gradually wiped out by terrifying foes, including the Cyclops Polyphemus, Poseidon's son, the enchantress Circe, the six-headed monster Scylla, and many other deadly threats. While Odysseus is lost at sea, arrogant suitors consume his wealth and attempt to marry his wife, Penelope, in order to seize his throne. When he finally returns home, he must fight to reclaim what is rightfully his. It is a brutal and unforgettable journey, proving that the fall of Troy was only the beginning of his greatest adventure. Since Troy occasionally shifts its focus to Odysseus, it would have been fascinating to see his story continue on screen. In the absence of a sequel, fans can turn to the 1997 television miniseries The Odyssey to experience the next chapter of his legendary tale. Achilles, however, achieves the immortality he always desired. His legend has echoed through history thanks to Homer's Iliad. Whether or not he was a real historical figure, his name has survived for nearly 3,000 years. In that sense, he accomplished the only form of immortality a human can truly attain: to be remembered across generations. Yet in the final moments of Troy, 2004, Achilles reveals that glory is no longer his greatest concern. Instead, he risks everything to find and protect Greece during the sack of Troy. He rescues the priestess and defeats those who threaten her, but his fate ultimately catches up with him. Seeking revenge for the death of his brother Hector, Paris attacks Achilles with a bow. The first arrow strikes his heel, and several more pierce his chest. Despite pulling the arrows from his body, Achilles eventually collapses. When he dies, the only arrow left embedded in him is the one lodged in his heel. This ending draws directly from the Greek mythology. According to the legend, Achilles' mother, Thetis, dipped him into the river Styx as an infant to make him invulnerable. However, she held him by his heel, leaving that small part of his body untouched by the river's magical waters. As a result, his heel remained his one and only weakness, giving rise to the famous expression, Achilles' heel, which symbolizes a single fatal vulnerability. According to legend, Achilles was not killed during the events described in the historical siege of Troy. Instead, it was believed that Paris ultimately ended his life by shooting an arrow into his heel at his only vulnerable spot. This famous story gave rise to the term Achilles' heel, symbolizing a person's greatest weakness. In the end, Achilles achieved the immortality he had always desired, and not through a long life, but through everlasting fame. Troy is ultimately a tragic tale. It shows how easily conflict can spiral into a devastating war between nations. Even today, we see leaders leading countries into war despite lacking the full support of their people. The Trojan War serves as a grim reminder of the terrible cost of such decisions, sending countless lives to an untimely end before the fate of Troy was finally sealed. War brings out both the best and the worst in humanity. After Patroclus is killed by Hector, who mistakenly believes he is fighting Achilles because Patroclus is wearing Achilles' armor, the great Myrmidon warrior is consumed by grief and rage. Achilles rides to the gates of Troy and challenges Hector to a final duel. Their confrontation ends with Hector's death. Driven by vengeance, Achilles ties Hector's body to his chariot and drags it back to the Greek camp, an act that reveals how deeply anger has overtaken him. Later, King Priam secretly enters Achilles' tent, risking his own life to recover his son's body. Achilles is surprised by the old king's courage and openly expresses his respect for him. Although Achilles tries to justify Hector's death by reminding Priam that Hector killed someone he loved, Priam responds with a powerful question: how many sons, fathers, brothers, and husbands have you killed? His words humble the great warrior and force him to confront the true cost of war. The exchange highlights one of the film's central messages: war is an endless cycle of grief and revenge. It ignores emotions, family bonds, and the humanity shared by enemies on both sides. The film concludes with a legendary Trojan horse. Believing the Greeks have abandoned the war, the Trojans bring the enormous wooden horse inside their city as a symbol of peace. Unbeknownst to them, Greek soldiers are hiding within it. Under the cover of darkness, they emerge, open the city gates, and allow the rest of the Greek army to enter Troy. What follows is a horrific massacre. Greek soldiers overrun the city, killing countless innocent civilians, including women and children. King Priam dies knowing that his beloved city has fallen and that everything he fought to protect has been lost. One of the most striking aspects of Troy is how it portrays its characters. The honorable heroes suffer devastating losses, while those driven by ambition and war often emerge victorious. Although the film is not a completely faithful adaptation of Homer's Iliad, it remains true to the spirit of Greek mythology. Unlike many modern stories where good ultimately triumphs over evil, Greek myths often embrace tragedy. They explore the harsh realities of human nature, fate, and the cruelty of the world. The destruction of an entire city is heartbreaking, made even more tragic by the deaths of so many heroic figures throughout the war. Despite its sorrowful ending, the story offers a small glimmer of hope. A handful of surviving Trojans escape the ruined city, carrying with them the possibility of building a new life beyond Troy's fallen walls. At the box office, Troy opened at #1 internationally, starring Brad Pitt, Eric Bana, and an impressive ensemble cast. Wolfgang Petersen's historical epic outperformed Van Helsing across numerous international markets. The film debuted in all 47 territories, earning an estimated $54.8 million from 6,722 screens, exceeding expectations and even surpassing its domestic opening performance. During the same period, Van Helsing experienced an average decline of around 52% in major international markets, adding approximately $24.5 million from 41 territories for a cumulative total of about $95 million. Industry analysts suggested that weak word of mouth significantly affected the Vampire Adventures performance. Even before the arrival of Troy, Troy surpassed Van Helsing in nearly every major market. It earned an estimated $8.1 million in Germany, marking the country's biggest opening of the year at the time. In France, it collected $6.3 million over 4 days from 743 screens, delivering the strongest opening for a U.S. release that year. The film also performed exceptionally well elsewhere, earning $6.2 million in Spain from 664 screens, $4.6 million in Australia from 416 screens, approximately $3 million in Mexico, and $1.7 million in Brazil. In several markets, it even outperformed previous blockbuster hits such as Gladiator and The Lord of the Rings: The Return of the King, cementing Troy as one of the biggest international box office successes of its release period.